Hey there, Tiny Dreamer fans! Today we're going to talk about how I found parking for my tiny house. Let's get started. Parking for a tiny house. It's a lot of work, let me tell you. When I first started my tiny house journey, I didn't know where I would be able to park. I was following a couple of the different tiny house groups on Facebook, but I still wasn't sure where it was legal to park. I didn't know if I was going to be in a campground, an RV park, a trailer park, somebody else's backyard, or if I wanted to own my own land. In the beginning, I actually started out with looking in some of the other tiny house groups in their the about section or their information section, and I would find if they had any tiny house communities available to live in. I would write everything down, especially if it was in Illinois, because that's where I wanted to park. And when I started writing all these down, I come to find out that some of the places were actually selling the lots, some were renting the lots, some were doing exchange for like different, like I'll garden for you if you let me park here for a month or whatever, and I can garden or take care of your farm. So there was many different types of places that I could stay. I did want to stay around Illinois for the time being until I found, where my future led me. So I was focusing on RV resorts and campgrounds in Illinois specifically. So I actually made a list of about 37 to 40 different campgrounds, and I started my due diligence on researching those specific campgrounds. In the notebook, I actually made a section for each one of them, and within each section was the name of the campground or RV resort, how long it took for me to get there from my family's houses. It had the cost included, if they were tiny house friendly or not, what the amenities were. So because I have electric and I don't need a toilet, I don't need sewer, and I don't need water. So I just needed to make sure that whatever place I was going to stay at provided the utilities that I needed. So when I started this whole list and stuff, I was getting rejected a lot. So each place that I would call, a lot of people didn't know what tiny houses were. They didn't know what they looked like. They didn't even know if they were legal. So a lot of the places were saying no. Now, as I said earlier, I start with the mobile home parks, and in my notebooks I would make all these tags and stuff. And now what I would do is write down over in the section over here, the star would be if I called them, any notes here if I called, and I'd put that there, and then this is if they said yes to the spot. Over here is the name, the time away from my family's house, their phone number and address, the owner, when they were open to, how much per month, the services that they had, and then I asked a couple questions on each of them. Do they allow tiny houses? What are their yearly rates? Are they open year-round? Do they require certification? So I did this for many different ones. I used highlighters in order for me to be able to see certain information right away. I did this for a very long time, day after day after day. Some of the people I had to call back, but it's really interesting to see. Not only that, I made a compiled list. These were things I found on tinyhousecommunity.com. People and selling land or renting land. These were more campgrounds. So there is a lot of work that goes into where to find parking for your tiny house, because At the end of all of this, I only ended up with about 12 of these places that said yes. Half were year-round and half were only seasonal. And then I was looking on tryittiny.com. They seemed to be a lot, 3 hours away, and I didn't like that because I wanted to be closer to my family. Next, I was looking at lands and different tiny house communities where you could buy a lot for a specific amount of money, anywhere from like that amount, and you get to own that piece of land, and it was tiny house friendly. I actually looked at some of these properties, and some of them did not work out. Of course, one of the biggest reasons is because I didn't have the money, so there was also more stuff on Try It Tiny. It's very interesting when you're doing this research because you learn a lot about people's expectations, even about what you want and don't want, the amenities that you do and don't want. You find out what's more important to other people. Some people don't allow pets. Did a lot of research. And the reason why you have to do a lot of research is because half these people don't call you back, so you have to keep trying. And you'll never find a place to park if you don't call these people and ask. At one point, I even made a list of all of the surrounding counties in Illinois just to see exactly what their zoning laws were. I didn't get far because it was exhausting. A lot of the lingo in the zoning laws you can't even understand, so you don't know if what you're going to be calling your tiny house. Some people call it tiny house on wheels. Some people would rather you say travel trailer. Do you want to call it an accessory dwelling unit? You have to be careful with the wording because in the zoning laws, that's what's tricky, is the wording. I made little notes like this all over my notebook. I wasn't aware of some of the definitions of some of these things, so I actually had to make sure to learn them so that I knew what I was talking about and asking for. And this is the notes that I wrote down. So out of 37 different campgrounds, I came up with 5 that were seasonal, and I came up with 2, 4, 6, 7 that were all year round. Now here's what happened with the all year round, because that was more important to me. I started up here 2 months after I made this list, and I started calling again, because you have to call again, because you don't know if these places are going to say yes after they said it like 2 months ago. So I called this place, and yep, they said no. Called this place, they said no. I called this place, and they said no. And they had all said yes before, so I was so confused. Then I called this place, which is my home, 4-star campground, and they said yes. They allow tiny houses. I called right away, and their everything that they had said 2 months earlier was still the same, and they welcome tiny houses. Here I am in this campground, and I do have a couple other options if this campground doesn't work out, and I'm sure I'll do some more due diligence, because I only have a few options, and with what I showed you before, I had tons of options, but not many in the long run. So that's the whole purpose of doing your due diligence. It really pays off in the end. So there you have it. That is how I found parking for my tiny house, and that is the process that I took to do it. You guys can use my process. I hope it helps, but just know to do your due diligence when trying to find parking, because it didn't take just one day or 2 days or even a week or a month. It took a lot of time to call these places, make sure that I was legal in these places and that I was going to have the things that they required of me. Same with price and cost and distance. Everything had to match up, so the list was the best thing that I could do. Get a notebook, write down all of those things that I wrote down, and do it in your area. If you need to, call the zoning in each county and see if they allow them as well if you're looking to buy your own land or stay on someone else's land. But for the most part, if a campground allows you, then it's okay with their zoning. The one I live in just happens to be a family-owned campground, so thank goodness that I found a legal place to park my tiny house. And now for a recap on everything that you should be writing in your notebook on your tiny house parking journey. Let's start with campgrounds. You're going to want to write this info down when researching any campground, RV park, or trailer park. You're going to want to write the name of the place, their phone number, their address, their email. This is all the information that they can be contacted at. Then you want to write down the distance from whether it's family, friends, job. If distance is important to you, then you'll want to write that down too. Don't forget to write down the name of the person you speak with. If you need to get in contact with them again, this will be the person you want to ask for. Also, leave a section for notes. Any other thing like you left a voicemail and they need to call back, or you left an email and they still have yet to return it, or you already got an answer of yes or no, this is the section you can put that in. Moving on to questions. And the questions that you would ask when you call about the campgrounds, you want to ask them if they accept or welcome tiny houses on wheels. You'll want to know the cost, the monthly cost, if you're interested in staying there year-round or seasonal, but you'll want to write down both just in case anywhere on your tiny house journey that you decide to do either or, you have that information. You'll also want to know if they require certification. Some companies and builders don't have the required certification that campgrounds and trailer parks need in order for you to stay there, so you'll want to find out if they need this certification. Moving on to land hosts. Land hosts are basically someone who lives on land already and allows you to rent their backyard or a piece of their property. Write down this info when researching each of the land hosts. You'll want to know their name. You want to write down their address, phone number, and email. Again, this information is going to help you contact them if you need to. Also, write down where you found them. This is a very important step because if someone else needs to know the information or you need to know where you found that person to get in touch with them, you'll need to know the social media source that you found them from. Again, add a section for notes. Moving on to the questions. When you call the land host, you're going to want to ask completely different questions than the campground. You'll want to know if they accept tiny houses on wheels. Some people may only want you to park their RV in their driveway, so you'll want to ask first. You want to make sure if they are plumbed for septic. If you have a compost toilet, then you don't need to worry about that. You want to know if they'll have electric. If you have solar, then you don't need to worry about that either. You want to know if they're animal friendly, especially if you have animals. You want to ask them if their land is zoned for tiny houses. If they don't know, you're going to want to ask the county that they live in because you're going to have to do your due diligence with that and find out. Next, you'll want to know how much per month that they will charge. After that, you'll want to ask, hey, maybe if you're only willing to charge $200, if I can, do some trade for some help on your land, then maybe we can call it even. Some tiny house people do ask this, and some people do have it set up that way. Last but not least, you'll want to ask how their neighbors are. A lot of zoning issues happen when neighbors find tiny houses or things in yards to be eyesores. So you want to know how their neighbors are. Are they friendly? Are they mean? Do they make many complaints? Stuff like that. And lastly is buying land. You'll want to write a whole new set of questions down if you're buying land. You want to write down the name, the address, the realtor's name, who's selling the property, their phone number, the distance from your family, job, friends, and a section for notes. When you call the realtor, you're going to want to ask completely different questions. How many acres are being sold? What is the cost of the acres being sold? Do you finance? Do you require a down payment? What are the property taxes? Because those will be your responsibility now. What is the county that it is in? Ask the realtor if they happen to know if that land is zoned for tiny houses. You'll also want to know if it's in a flood zone. Most properties that are in a flood zone either charge you less, but then that's why, because it's in a flood zone. And seeing as you'll be in a tiny house on wheels, you might not want to be in a flood zone. And last but not least, do I have to have a house on foundation first? Some tiny houses aren't allowed on land unless there's a house on foundation. If you are buying land, then sometimes there's already a house on foundation and you don't need to worry about that. But if it's just a plain piece of land, you're going to want to know if you can park your tiny house on there without a house on foundation. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe below, and if you have any questions, drop them in the comments.